Imagine the chill of a foggy morning in the Pacific Northwest, where the air hangs heavy with the scent of damp earth and salt from the sea. It's 1987, and deep in the rugged wilderness of Washington state, far from the bustling cities like Seattle, there's a place that doesn't exist on any official map. Not anymore, at least. But back then, it was called Black Ridge Correctional Facility, a name whispered among those in the know, like a ghost story passed around a campfire. This isn't some Hollywood tale of daring escapes or monstrous inmates. This is the real deal, pieced together from faded records, hushed interviews, and the lingering nightmares of the few who walked its halls. I'm talking about a prison that vanished, erased from history, and the secret buried so deep that even the government pretends it never happened. Buckle up, because this story will pull you into the shadows of human desperation, where the line between right and wrong blurs like ink in the rain. Our story starts with a man named Harlan Reeves, a corrections officer in his mid-30s, built like a linebacker who'd seen better days, broad shoulders slumping under the weight of too many graveyard shifts and a marriage fraying at the edges. Harlan wasn't the type to chase glory. He grew up in a small logging town where folks worked hard and kept their mouths shut. After a stint in the army that left him with a bum knee and a distrust of authority, he took the job at Blackridge because it paid steady and came with benefits. "It's just watching over bad guys," he'd tell his wife Sarah over lukewarm coffee in their cramped kitchen. But Blackridge wasn't just any prison. Tucked away in the Olympic Peninsula, surrounded by miles of impenetrable forest and jagged cliffs dropping into the Strait of Juan de Fuca, it was designed for the forgotten ones, the inmates the system didn't want the public to remember. The facility had been built in the late 60s, during the height of the Cold War paranoia, when the feds were experimenting with off-the-books operations. Officially, it was a medium security pen for white-collar crooks and low-level drug offenders, but whispers among the staff hinted at something more sinister. Harlan heard the rumors on his first day. Political dissidents from the Vietnam-era protests, whistleblowers who'd crossed the wrong agencies, even a few foreign nationals swept up in shadowy renditions. The air inside those concrete walls carried a perpetual dankness, like wet moss and rusting metal, mingled with the faint, acrid tang of bleach from endless cleanings. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made every corridor feel like a trap waiting to spring. Harlan's shift started at dusk, when the sun dipped behind the evergreens, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. He'd drive his beat-up Ford pickup along a winding gravel road that twisted through the woods, the tires crunching over fallen branches and potholes filled with rainwater. The gatehouse was a squat bunker of reinforced steel, manned by old-timer guards like Eddie, who smoked unfiltered Camels and spat tobacco juice into a styrofoam cup. "Keep your eyes open, kid," Eddie would grunt, handing over the keys. "These walls have ears." Harlan would nod, feeling the weight of his utility belt, the baton, the radio, the handcuffs that clinked like a promise of trouble. Inside, the prison was a labyrinth of cell blocks, each one echoing with the muffled sounds of men trying to hold on to their sanity. The clanging of metal doors, the distant coughs and murmurs, the occasional shout that pierced the night like a knife. Harlan patrolled the East Wing, where the specials were housed, inmates with files so redacted they looked like Swiss cheese. One of them was Victor Lang, a wiry guy in his 50s with a face etched by years of regret. Victor had been a journalist back in the day, exposing corruption in the timber industry that tied into bigger fish. Government contracts, kickbacks, maybe even ties to organized crime. Or so the story went. He'd been sentenced for espionage-related charges, but no one knew the details. Harlan would pass his cell during counts, catching glimpses of Victor scribbling in a notebook under the dim glow of a contraband flashlight. The man smelled of stale sweat and desperation, his eyes hollow but sharp, like he was always calculating his next move. It was on a night like any other, rain pattering against the barred windows, turning the world outside into a blurry haze, that Harlan first sensed something was off. The inmates were restless, more than usual. Whispers slithered through the vents, fragments of conversations about the transfer and erasing the slate. Harlan dismissed it as paranoia at first. Prisons bred rumors like mold in the showers. But then came the lockdown drill that wasn't a drill. Sirens wailed through the speakers, a piercing screech that made your teeth ache, and the guards were herded into the control room by Warden Klein, a stone-faced bureaucrat with a clipboard and a perpetual scowl. "Listen up," Klein barked, his voice cutting through the static of the intercom. The room reeked of burnt coffee and cigarette smoke, the fluorescent bulbs flickering like they were about to give out. "We've got orders from up top. Blackridge is being decommissioned, effective immediately." Harlan exchanged glances with the other officers, confusion rippling through the group like a chill wind. Decommissioned? The place had been operational for decades, housing over 200 souls. Where would they go? Klein waved off questions, his face paling under the harsh light. "Inmates will be transferred to undisclosed facilities. Staff, you'll be reassigned or offered severance. No discussions outside these walls. National security." That word, national security, hung in the air like a noose. Harlan felt a knot twist in his gut, the kind that comes from knowing you're stepping into quicksand. He thought of Sarah back home, pregnant with their first child, worrying about bills and the future. This job was their lifeline. As the meeting broke, Eddie pulled him aside in the hallway, the older man's breath sour with whiskey hidden in his thermos. "Don't buy it, Harlan. This ain't about decommissioning. Something's rotten here. Remember that riot last year? The one they covered up?" Harlan nodded vaguely. He'd heard bits. The official report said it was a minor scuffle over food, but guards talked of inmates beaten bloody, one even dying from natural causes. Eddie leaned closer, his voice a rasp. "They're wiping this place clean because of what happened in the basement. The experiments." Harlan's blood ran cold. The basement was off limits. A sub-level sealed with heavy doors that required special clearance. Rumors swirled about it being a holdover from the prison's early days. Interrogation rooms, isolation cells, maybe even medical testing for some black budget program. He'd never been down there, but on quiet nights he'd swear he heard faint cries echoing up through the grates, like ghosts scratching at the floor. That night, as he finished his rounds, Victor Lang pressed his face to the cell bars, his fingers gripping the cold steel until his knuckles whitened. "Officer Reeves," he whispered, his voice trembling but urgent. "You gotta listen. They're not transferring us. They're disappearing us. I know things about this place, about what they've done. Help me get word out, and I'll make sure your family's taken care of." Harlan froze, the hallway suddenly feeling narrower, the air thicker with the metallic tang of fear. Victor's eyes pleaded, raw with the kind of terror that comes from staring into the abyss. Harlan had seen that look before, in the mirror after his army days, when nightmares of ambushes woke him sweating. But getting involved, that could cost him everything. He muttered something about protocols and moved on, his boots echoing down the corridor like accusations. Yet as he lay in bed that morning, the rain drumming on the roof of his trailer, sleep evaded him. Sarah stirred beside him, her hand resting on her swelling belly. "What's wrong, hun?" she murmured. Harlan pulled her close, inhaling the faint lavender of her shampoo, but his mind raced back to Blackridge. What if Victor was right? What secret was so damning that an entire prison had to vanish? The next shift brought chaos. Trucks rumbled up the gravel road under cover of darkness, their headlights slicing through the fog like knives. Inmates were roused from their cells, shackled and hooded, loaded into vans without a word. Harlan watched from the yard, the damp grass soaking through his boots, the chill seeping into his bones. Victor was among them, his muffled protests lost in the engine roar. But as the convoy pulled away, a guard Harlan didn't recognize, some fed in a crisp suit, handed Klein a thick envelope. "Burn the records," the man said flatly. "Make sure nothing's left." Harlan's heart pounded as he slipped into the records room later that night, the door creaking like a warning. The air was stale, dust motes dancing in his flashlight beam. Files spilled from cabinets, names, dates, charges, all marked for destruction. He rifled through them, his hands trembling, until he found Victor's dossier. Pages upon pages of blacked-out text, but one line jumped out. Subject involved in Project Echo. Termination recommended. What the hell was Project Echo? Before he could dig deeper, footsteps echoed in the hall. Harlan shoved the file into his jacket, his pulse thundering in his ears, and ducked out a side door into the pouring rain. As dawn broke, gray and unforgiving, Harlan drove home with the stolen file burning a hole in his conscience. Little did he know that was the moment the prison truly began to disappear, not just from maps, but from memories. And the secret? It was about to drag him into a nightmare he couldn't escape. The rain hadn't let up for days, turning the gravel roads around Blackridge into rivers of mud that sucked at Harlan's boots as he trudged to his pickup. The stolen file was tucked inside his jacket, pressed against his chest like a second heartbeat. Its weight felt heavier than it should, each page a ticking bomb that could unravel his life. He drove home through the pre-dawn gloom, the windshield wipers slapping rhythmically, their steady thump-thump mingling with the memory of Victor Lang's desperate whisper. "They're disappearing us." The words clawed at Harlan's mind, sharp as the scent of wet pine and diesel that clung to the air. By the time he pulled into the gravel lot of his trailer, the sky was a bruise, low and heavy, promising more storms. Inside, the trailer was quiet, except for the faint hum of the fridge and Sarah's soft breathing from the bedroom. Harlan didn't dare turn on a light. He sat at the kitchen table, the linoleum sticky under his elbows, and spread the file open under the dim glow of a camping lantern. The pages crinkled, brittle with age, and the blacked-out lines stared back like accusing eyes. Victor's photo was clipped to the first page, a grainy mugshot showing a man with hollow cheeks and a defiant glare. The unredacted scraps mentioned Project Echo, non-compliant subject, and basement protocols. Harlan's stomach churned. He'd heard stories about government experiments, MKUltra, Tuskegee, things whispered about in bars by old soldiers who'd seen too much. But at Blackridge in 1987, it seemed impossible. Yet the file's cold, bureaucratic language carried a truth that made his skin crawl. He was halfway through a page about behavioral reprogramming when a creak from the bedroom snapped his head up. Sarah stood in the doorway, her nightgown stretched tight over her pregnant belly, her eyes heavy with worry. "Harlan, what's got you up at this hour?" Her voice was soft, but edged with the kind of fear that comes from knowing your husband's keeping secrets. He hesitated, the file burning under his fingertips. "Just work stuff," he muttered, sliding it under a stack of bills. But Sarah wasn't fooled. She crossed her arms, her bare feet scuffing the worn carpet. "You've been jumpy since that lockdown. Talk to me." Harlan wanted to spill it all, the vans, the hooded inmates, Victor's warning, but the words caught in his throat. Telling her could pull her into the quicksand with him. Instead, he forced a smile and said, "It's nothing, darling. Go back to bed for the baby." She lingered, her gaze piercing, then turned away, leaving a silence that felt like a rebuke. The next shift at Blackridge was a descent into chaos. The prison felt hollow, its corridors echoing with an unnatural stillness. Half the cells in the East Wing stood empty, their metal bunks stripped bare, the air thick with the stale musk of abandoned lives. The remaining inmates were quieter than usual, their eyes darting like cornered animals. Harlan's radio crackled with terse orders. No talking, no questions, just patrol and report. The guards were on edge too, their banter replaced by tight-lipped glances. Eddie, chain-smoking in the break room, looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. "They're gutting this place," he rasped, exhaling a plume of smoke that curled in the dim light. "Heard they're shipping the last of them out tomorrow. Then it's just us and the shredders." Harlan's gut twisted. The file was still in his truck, hidden under the passenger seat, but its contents gnawed at him. Project Echo termination recommended. He couldn't shake the image of Victor, hooded and shackled, vanishing into the night. During his rounds, he passed the basement access door, a rusted slab of steel with a keypad that glowed faintly red. He'd never had the code, but now it felt like a dare. The air near the door was colder, carrying a faint sour odor, like antiseptic mixed with something organic and wrong. He lingered, his flashlight beam trembling over the lock until footsteps echoed behind him. It was Klein, the warden, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Reeves, you got business down here?" His voice was sharp, like a blade slicing through the tension. Harlan mumbled an excuse about checking a noise and hurried back to his post, his heart hammering. That night, unable to sleep, Harlan drove to a payphone outside a gas station, the rain hammering the booth like a drum. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Tommy Gaines, an old army buddy who'd gone into private investigation after a dishonorable discharge. Tommy had a nose for digging up dirt the feds didn't want found. The line crackled, and Tommy's gravelly voice answered, laced with suspicion. "Harlan, hell, it's been ages. You in trouble?" Harlan kept it vague, mentioning Blackridge, the transfers, the file. Tommy went quiet, then said, "Meet me tomorrow. Diner off Route 101, noon, bring what you got." As Harlan hung up, a semi roared by, its headlights briefly illuminating the booth and casting his shadow like a ghost against the glass. The diner smelled of greasy bacon and burnt coffee, its vinyl booths cracked and faded. Tommy looked rougher than Harlan remembered. Scarred knuckles, a leather jacket patched with duct tape, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room like he expected trouble. Harlan slid the file across the table, keeping his voice low. Tommy flipped through it, his jaw tightening. "Project Echo," he muttered. "Heard whispers about it in '82. Some DARPA bullshit, mind control, psychological ops, testing on people nobody'd miss. If Blackridge was part of it, they're not just closing it. They're torching the evidence." He tapped Victor's photo. "This guy's a loose end. You help him, you're painting a target on your back." Harlan's mouth went dry. He thought of Sarah, the baby, the life they were trying to build. But he also thought of Victor's eyes, the raw fear in them, and the cries he'd heard from the basement. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tommy leaned forward, his breath smelling of cigarettes and regret. "Get proof, something they can't bury. But Harlan, if you go down this road, there's no coming back clean." Back at Blackridge, the prison was a skeleton of itself. The last inmates were being prepped for transfer, their shouts muffled by hoods as they were herded into vans. Harlan's shift was in the records room, where shredders whirred like hungry beasts, chewing up decades of secrets. He worked alone, the air thick with paper dust that stung his eyes. His hands shook as he slipped another file into his jacket, not Victor's, but one labeled Echo Protocols. It detailed stress tests and chemical inducements in the basement, with dates and inmate numbers that matched the disappearances. His flashlight caught a name he recognized, Daniel Moss, an inmate who'd supposedly died of a heart attack last year. The file said otherwise, terminated after non-compliance in Trial 17. The basement door loomed in his mind like a guillotine. He had to know. Slipping past the control room, where Klein was barking orders over the radio, Harlan punched in a code he'd seen a maintenance guy use weeks ago. The keypad beeped, and the door groaned open, releasing a gust of air that smelled of mildew and something sharper, like copper. The stairs descended into darkness, each step creaking under his weight. At the bottom, his flashlight revealed a corridor lined with steel doors, each marked with a number and a biohazard sticker. The air was heavy, the silence broken only by a faint drip-drip from a leaking pipe. He opened one door and froze. Inside was a chair bolted to the floor, restraints dangling like skeletal fingers, and a tray of syringes crusted with dried blood. Scratched into the wall were words, "They see everything." A noise, a metallic clang, echoed from deeper in the corridor. Harlan's breath caught, his flashlight beam jerking toward the sound. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, were coming his way. He backed out, heart pounding, and sprinted up the stairs, the file clutched tight. As he reached the main floor, the sirens wailed again, signaling another lockdown. Klein's voice crackled over the intercom. "All personnel, report to the yard." "We have a breach," Harlan's mind raced. A breach, or had they found him out? He stuffed the file into his locker, his hands slick with sweat, and joined the other guards in the yard. The rain was a torrent now, soaking his uniform, the cold biting into his bones. In the distance, headlights pierced the fog, more vans, but these weren't for inmates. Men in unmarked gear, faces obscured, were unloading crates labeled hazardous materials. Harlan caught Eddie's eye across the yard, the older man's face pale as death. "They're cleaning house," Eddie mouthed, barely audible over the storm. As the crates were hauled toward the basement, Harlan realized he was holding a piece of a puzzle that could bring it all crashing down, or bury him with it.